Hey, this is John from whatifi, and in this video we're going to walk through a much more advanced use for capacity, resources, utilization, and some of our more advanced utility events like redistributing modifiers. This will be a longer video because it is a more complex scenario. This is meant to mimic a traditional visual effects studio. The same example could be applied to any type of agency or consulting work where you're defining projects, revenue, the resources required for those, and then potentially the usage of resources to date. In this model, we're establishing our staff, our bids and our revenue, utilization and capacity calculations, and then we're running 6 different resource award scenarios. In one use case, we are using the default probability of these projects landing. In another scenario, we are integrating what happens if we land all of that work. It's common to be able to implement and tie your projects to third-party CRMs like HubSpot or Salesforce. That's something we also support in whatifi in the very near future. And as you pull in your projects from those other tools, they come along with a default award percentage. So for example, you might have feature film number 1, which is 100% active. You may have feature film number 2 as a project, which has an 80% probability of being awarded. You may have project number 3, which is awarded. And you may have project number 4, for example, here, a small episodic television series that is early in its development and may only have a 30% chance of being awarded. So what we're doing in our downstream here is we're running a scenario where nothing changes and you're using those default percentages, or what happens if the work is fully awarded. And then what we're doing is we're doing some triage here where we're looking at some of our resources, specifically our lighting department that has a capacity calculation challenge, and determining what happens if we front load or back load those resources. So there's a lot going on here, but let's kind of dig in and get started. Okay? So first, in this particular model, we are determining how many artists we have in Vancouver, Mumbai, or London. Right? Lots of different ways of looking at that data here. If I pop this up on the graph right now, and I look at my resources ledger, I'm able to look at my artists total or my artists per role type, and to see those displayed on the graph here. So for example, we have a total of 100 artists working for the company across all those locations, and you can also drill down and look at all of this data independently. I can also show you one feature which is a little bit more hidden, and we're going to be making some changes to it. Eventually, you'll be able to right-click on here and say to isolate only this event. I'm on a Mac right now. If I select Command and select this event, now I'm displaying only the contents of this particular node. So I'm seeing that I have 25 artists here in Vancouver, for example. If I Command select the Mumbai one, I can now see that I've got 52 artists there and 25 artists here. And if I click off, then I'm back to the default. So it's a bit of a power feature for being able to isolate specific calculations without necessarily having to run through all of our ledgers. Next up, as I mentioned before, we've defined 4 projects in here. All right, there's a couple of different ways of looking at that. You can step through our cards in this particular mode. Relatively soon, you'll be able to look at them in this particular mode as well. Also, sometimes you can select our third icon here, which is our override view, just to be able to see some of the values that are inside of our calculations here. So here we can see that we have our 4 projects. Some of them are fully awarded and some of them have a weighted value there. Next up, income. We use the income or a contract event to be able to define for each project discrete units. Here they could be bid packs, so it's common in visual effects to be able to have a bid pack. So maybe we're looking at feature film number 2 at one particular body of work, happens to be $3.2 million with a start date and an end date. Or a second bid pack, $4.1 million with a different start date and a different end date. This information and these dates can be passed downstream to other events that inherit those dates. And why that's important is that if we make changes to these dates, these downstream events will inherit those changes, and you're not having to change dates all throughout your model. Okay? Next here, I've isolated all of the 4 different projects and the bids or resources that are required to pull off that work. So in our resource event here, for example, this is a project that is already awarded. It's feature film number 1. I have my animators, my lighters, and my compositors. And in here, I am setting the number of hours that are going to be required. And I'm inheriting the start dates and the end dates from those upstream income or contracts. Okay. As a reminder about the power of distributions, in here you can also select any resource and the hours and change how those hours are distributed over time. What this does is it takes those 2,500 hours, and in future versions of the application, you'll just be able to select days as well, and it redistributes those to better match how the resources are really consumed in practical delivery of the work. If I look at something like animation, for example, it's usually common to have those resources more towards the beginning of a schedule. And as you sort of saw with compositing here, it's more common to see those near the end. And if there's a temp delivery or a trailer delivery, you can also model that into your distribution. We've done that for all 4 projects that are here. In some cases, we have multiple bid packs in here. In some cases, we have multiple episodes and the resources that are required. An important note here. So we have to define in advance what these resource buckets are. As a reminder, in your top right corner here, you're able to enter our ledger manager where you are able to go into your resources and to create buckets or accounts or ledgers. Those are all interchangeable terms, and we're defining what our structure looks like: animators, compositors, and lighters. And then when we create a project, it takes this structure and pastes it into every single project. So this just becomes a universal library of resources that are required per project. Right. This is a bit more of a complex feature, and there is a video in our how-to series that explains ledgers in more detail. Next, utilization. So a project may already be in progress, for example, feature film number 1. You can bring in the hours used to date for each of these roles, and we will use these calculations to readjust the resources that are required to complete a project. In some cases, a project may be overstaffed and pacing ahead and burning more resources than intended. In other scenarios, those resources may not have been available, and now the project actually requires more animators or lighters or compositors to finish the project on time. That's why this resource is very valuable. And then we use the capacity event to actually calculate what that gap is. In this event, by default, it assumes that you are trying to staff to 100% of your need and is assuming a 5-day work week and 8 hours per day. You can go into this event, though, and now run capacity calculations where you staff, for example, to 90% of your need, or shift to 6-day work weeks to be able to readjust and recalculate your resource needs with these edge case types of approaches. Then we kind of get into some advanced work here. So because we are inheriting the weighted award percentage of these shows, if we're looking at our default projections here, this means we are displaying the capacity need that is weighted to 80% of the one project and 30% of the other. But maybe we need to look at a scenario that says, well, what happens if we are awarded all of this work? So that's what this first decision is here. We're using a group event, and in that group event, I am picking upstream projects, specifically feature film number 2 and small episodic number 2, that currently have an award weighting of 0.8 and 0.3, and I'm grouping those together. And then I am using a modifier. And in this modifier, I am targeting that group, and I'm targeting the property, which is their probability, and I'm changing that value to 1. Basically represents 100%. So now I have 2 scenarios. One where my resource and my revenue are a byproduct of the probability, and one where everything is turned on. And now I'm looking at either my best case or worst case scenario for award percentages. Then I'm looking at how to handle schedule delays. If I bring this model up and I look at my capacity for artists, and I'm looking at 6 different scenarios, it becomes pretty obvious across all of these scenarios that have a range of capacity challenges here. In general, it looks like we are fine for capacity across the board, but if we drill a little bit deeper down into the model and we look at specific types of roles and bring those up, we will see that we actually have some capacity challenges in our model. If we look at animators, in all of those 6 different scenarios, we are very close to capacity problems, but we are fine. If we look at compositors, same sort of thing. If anything, we're actually overstaffed a little bit for compositors in this model. But if we look at lighters, we start to run into a lot of challenges here, where in most of these scenarios, we are underwater and are short on lighters. This is where we kind of get into the next generation, where we're looking at what happens if, one, the resources for a particular project are delayed by 3 months. So there is, for example, a rumor that feature film number 2, if we are awarded it, it may be delayed by 3 months. So we've created a modifier event here that takes bid pack number 1 and the revenue and the start dates for this particular project and shuffle those out by 3 months. And we do the same thing for bid pack number 2. And if you recall, what a modifier does is just in this one particular version of the future, it overrides an upstream value, namely the income event here, and the start dates that are in that particular project, and changes them in just that one version of the model. And as a result, any downstream resource event that uses this event is now getting that change. Again, fairly complex concept to wrap your head around, but it's hopefully one of those things that makes sense as you play with the model a little bit more. So now we have 2 different threads here. One where there are no scheduled delays for feature film number 2, and one where things are delayed by 3 months. So now what we've done is we've gone and we've isolated all of our lighting. So I've taken another group event and I'm looking at lighting all across the board in every single project. And knowing that there's this potential for this feature film work, I'm trying to determine what happens if we take all of our lighting across all of our projects and we front load those resources or push those resources to the back of the schedule. So this is a distribution modifier. Again, this is a powerful event. It's fairly customized. I can target that group of lighting tasks. I can add a distribution curve here, which is now pushing the resources to be used more at the beginning of the schedule for every single project there. And I have the ability to replace the distribution or skew the distribution. So what that is doing is it's taking the default distribution when I am skewing and is weighting or pushing it to the beginning of that project's schedule. I can do the same thing here with the backloading, which is what happens if I delay and push most of those resources further into the schedule. Right? And as a result, there are 6 different what if outcomes that are all playing out here in real time. Right? Now, as a reminder, as you are playing with your software, you can at any particular stage start to lock in scenarios, right? So you could lock in this particular calculation. You could lock in some of these other calculations. And again, I'm in the sample scenario view here, so it's not going to calculate. And you can start to refine down your list of scenarios. Right? I've favorited a few scenarios here, for example. So a reminder, when you select a thread on the right-hand side, you can see the active path through the model. If you need to, you can also drill down in so you're just looking at one scenario at a time. And if you need to, you can also remove the select all threads, and this gives you the ability to look at each scenario one by one. So we're now toggling through these different versions, and we can see what happens to our resource needs as we try different scenarios. So for example, here, if we have the weighted award and things are delayed by 3 months and we front load our resources, we come closer to not having capacity challenges. All right. Whereas if I look at some of these other scenarios, we can see the differences in those resource needs. Again, this is a far more advanced scenario, but it gives you a sense of the kind of granular changes that you can make to your schedules and your projects to map out more realistic capacity and resource needs. As always, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to walk through a custom demo at any stage. Thanks very much.